and welcome to this Healthy Aging Global Expert Mission in China dissemination webinar. Thank you all for joining, and during this webinar we'll be hearing about the outcomes from this mission to China that took place back in 2019 in April time. So my name is Sandeep Sandhu. I work at the Knowledge Transfer Network within the international team, and I will be chairing this webinar. Before we start, I'd like to cover some housekeeping. So we have a large number of participants who have registered for this event. So we will be putting you all on mute to prevent any background noise. After testing your speakers, please do remember to connect your audio by using the join audio icon at the bottom of, left of the screen, or you can dial in via phone using the number provided in the joining instructions. If you do have any technical problems, please use the chat box and our host, Poonam Phul, will be happy to assist you. And also during the course of this webinar, we'd love to have your questions come through. So please do send us your questions through the Q&A box. And my colleagues will either respond via a written message or we'll save them for the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And please don't use the Q&A box for technical problems. A final note, this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available on the KTN website, and the slides will also be emailed to you following this session. So just to highlight that this session is being hosted by the Knowledge Transfer Network and has been organised by myself, Sandeep Sandhu, and my colleagues Gabriella and David from the health team within the KTN. So just to run through the agenda for this session, so I will be giving a brief welcome and introduction, and then I'll be handing over to Hazel Harper to talk about the overview of the Global Expert Mission to China. And Hazel Harper is the Senior Innovation Lead for Healthy Aging and Digital Tech at Innovate UK, and she led the mission to China back in April. I will then be handing over to 4 experts who all participated in the Global Expert Mission to China. So we first have Paul Burstow, the Chair of the Social Care Institute for Excellence and President of the Technology Enabled Care Services Association. We also have Tao Fu, Head of Business Improvement at Zero Care, Christine Asprey, Chief Exec at WCS Care, and Tim Barkley, CEO of Apello. Following that session, we have Mel Collins, Head of the Fund for International Collaboration at UK Research and Innovation, and Hazel Harper of Innovate UK, talking about the outcomes of the Global Expert Mission. And that's followed by Chris Bourne, who is a Senior Specialist in Healthcare at the Department for International Trade, who will be talking about the support that DIT provide for British businesses. And then finally, we have the Q&A session, which will be led by David Calder and Gabriella at the KTN, and they will be facilitating that session. And then you can, they'll be posing your questions to the panelists. And we hope to close at around 3:45. So just a brief introduction. Who is the KTN? So the KTN is the UK's innovation network. Our mission is to deliver economic growth, connect people to speed up innovation, and solve problems to find new markets for new ideas. We bring together businesses, entrepreneurs, academics, funders, government agencies to all develop new products, processes, and services. We work very closely with Innovate UK, the UK's funding agency, and we deliver their global expert missions on their behalf. So this program, the Global Expert Mission program, was established in 2017, and it was really to provide an evidence base for where we support international collaboration and to scope out new collaboration opportunities and market insights. You can find more information on these expert missions on the KTN website, and the links are all there. We also have an excellent health team. So Gabriella and David are both within the health team at the KTN. And I would encourage you to sign up to their newsletters to find out more about funding opportunities and networking events. You can also find the outcomes from our expert mission to China on healthy aging in a report, and that can also be found on the KTN website. So going back to the agenda, I will now hand over to Hazel Harper to talk about the overview of the Global Expert Mission to China.
Hello everyone, good to meet you virtually. So why did we decide on China? Next slide please, Sandy. Thank you. There is an established relationship between the UK and China, and later in the presentation Mel Collins will speak a little bit more about that. So using that relationship as a building brick, if you like, it was established that we'd take this gem to China to look specifically in the field of healthy aging. Typically, GEMS or other expert missions tend to be more bioscience facing, and it was decided that given the current world health trend around healthy aging, that this GEM would focus more in that area, and specifically more in the area of health and care than traditionally we might have. And that decision was based on things that you would consider obvious in terms of aging being a priority, and certainly for the UK and China. Both countries are facing a marked increase in aging population, and the younger generations of those countries are facing an unprecedented burden of care. So this was a very pertinent subject for both the UK and China to explore together. And as we are all very familiar with, the pace of population aging is much faster in China than many other countries. For example, the percentage of Chinese aged 60 years or above is expected to increase from around 12%, circa 168 million in 2010, to over 28%, circa 402 million in 2040. China doesn't have a system in the way that we would recognise a system in the UK, so it's quite a pressing need for them to meet this ageing population and their changing needs. This demographic shift has moved the burden of disease, and their systems are not set up to do that in the way that we would recognise here. And therefore that presents an opportunity for UK businesses to maybe consider moving into the China market, and Chris Bourne will speak a little about that later on. The prevalence of long-term health conditions that increase with age, according to a 2010 estimate, account for about 70% of the total health and social care spending in England. So therefore, in a country that's as large as China, there's an opportunity, an economic opportunity there to look at providing interventions, services and solutions to meet that need. And similarly, as there, our own population is growing, so we can use what we have learnt, our expertise, to transfer that into a new market. Next slide, please, Sandy. Thank you. So the main mission, it wasn't about medtech. It certainly was focused on health and care. And we wanted to gather intelligence on the approach to age-relating challenges in China. Were they similar? Where were the parallels? Maybe what was happening in China that we could use in the UK, not only for insights into new markets, but also how we might approach our own challenge of an ageing population. We hope to find new areas to explore and opportunities against an established set of principles for a co-development program with the Chinese. So we wanted to be out in amongst the population to look at businesses, to see them in action, to speak with governments, to really understand both the cultural and locality context of the different challenges they were facing with their ageing population. And again, we wanted to look to see where there were similarities, and there were some similarities with our own challenges. And from all that information, insight and knowledge, we wanted to feed that into the newly announced at that time UK-China Healthy Aging Flagship Challenge, and of course inform other initiatives. So in the UK, the other initiative at the time that was newly announced was the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund and the Healthy Aging Programme there, which is also looking to see how we manage and support our own ageing population with a goal to improve and increase later life by 5 years, and for those 5 years to be good quality and independence. So that was our main mission objectives, and you'll hear from the panel today their insights and views on what was a very, very interesting mission, and where we felt that there were opportunities for the UK to reach out into Chinese business and also learn from their insights and areas of expertise that we probably have in the UK but may not be using in the same way. So I will now hand over to Sandeep for the next section of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hazel. So for the next session, I will be handing over to the expert panelists who all participated in the week-long mission to China. So first up, we have Paul Burstow. So as I mentioned earlier, he is the chairman of the Social Care Institute for Excellence and the president of Tech Services Association. So I will hand over to Paul.
Thank you very much, Sandeep, and thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this feedback session from the expert mission that we had last year. I'm going to share my screen and put up just a couple of slides, if I may. So I thought I'd just start by just saying a very little bit more about what SKY, Social Care Institute for Excellence, and the Tech Services Association do. SKY is an independent charity. We've been established now for nearly 20 years. Our role is a combination of advocacy, policy work, and translating policy into practice. We work very closely with the Department of Health and Social Care in England, but also with the governments in Northern Ireland and in Wales. And again, very much on that area of translating policy into practice, and also practice informing policy development going forward. We do that very much in a co-productive way, working with people with lived experiences of services, and find that an incredibly powerful way of making sure that we land transformation and change in an effective way. The TSA, the Technology Enabled Care Services Association is an organization that represents both the providers and manufacturers and service organizers around technology-enabled care services across the United Kingdom. And we are the only UK accredited body for setting of standards in the social alarm and technology-enabled care sectors. So I was just going to say a little bit about my sort of takeaways from the trip and the key points that sort of stand out for me from the report. This slide just sort of pulls up some points from an article which I wrote shortly after the visit to China. It was published in The Guardian and really just makes a number of points about some of the key things that you've just heard Hazel describe. China does have a rapidly aging population. It's become a very powerful policy driver and has been set out in a number of their key policy statements over the last year or two. By the moment, there are more people over the age of 60 than under 15. And as you can see, by 2050, China will have the oldest population on the planet. But they have a challenge. Although China is either the largest or second largest economy in the world, in terms of per capita, it's a country that is getting old before it's getting rich. And that obviously poses some real issues for policymakers, for government, and for families. And one of the responses to that has been a massive expansion in care provision to support family care and to help people remain in their own homes. And that's seen a dramatic expansion in both bricks and mortar solutions, but also home care as well. And one of the things that I think we were struck by was just the sheer scale of the experimentation in models of care and development of their strategy as a government, with 15 cities trying out different models of long-term care insurance and prototyping other aspects of their approach to delivering care services. And just one of those, the city of Shanghai, which we visited, covers a population that is the third the size of the UK. So they're experimenting on a big scale, and that will lead to further policy development. And the context of all of this is a significant explosive growth in the sector. I think we found really a number of challenges stood out really. One was workforce, serious issues around being able to recruit and retain the workforces that they need to be able to provide the range and quality of care. Significant issues about whether they are getting enough insight from data to be able to drive their models of care and become more anticipatory in the way in which they operate. I think an interest in quality standards, how to set them, how to regulate them, how to police them, and what role technology itself can play, both as a complement to, a substitute for, and an aid to increase productivity. Just going on to my second slide, one of the things that was quite striking during all of the time we were out there was from Shanghai. They, in the last 2 to 3 years, have expanded a new model of care that they've introduced to 200 care hubs. They're run by a combination, they're funded by the state, but they're run by private organizations, and they provide under one roof a wide range of different services, from respite to early stage dementia care to social connection, and they're on typical streets spread out across the city. I said already that technology plays an important part in China's plans, and just list there on the slide a number of things that are relevant to that, not least the use of gait monitoring, which is what the picture is intending to try and reflect. And there's a very good case study set out in the GEM report of that being used in practice and how it's being helped to reduce risks of falls and to identify people at risk of such accidents in the first place. So I think my overall conclusion in terms of the trip was that there are opportunities to work in China, both in a research context, but also in terms of being investment partners, particularly in regards to bringing our expertise of running care services, our models of care, and our use of data. And with that, I think I'm going to conclude and hand over to the next of my colleagues.
hand over to Tao, who's Head of Business Improvement at Care.
Thanks, Sandeep. Hello, everyone. My name is Tao Fu. I'm the Head of Business Improvements of Care. It's a great honor to have the opportunity to share my learnings from the UK-China Healthy Aging Expert Mission, which happened back in April 2019. It's been a while, but I think lots of the observation and learnings still applies. So first of all, please allow me to give a very brief introduction of Sarah, of what we are and who we are and what we do. I think the context will help you to better understand some of my findings from the China mission as well. So Sarah is a technology-enabled home care provider using digital and AI to improve elderly care services. We've built unprecedented machine learning algorithms, allowing it to predict health deteriorations before they occur. And the business actually launched in 2016. It's only been 3.5 years old, so we're still quite young in the journey. Sarah has expanded to over 15 cities across the UK with over 2,000 employees and is now delivering over 10,000 care sessions a day. And as part of our growth strategy, it has started to acquire and transform traditional care sectors and businesses, completing 4 transactions in the past 12 months. So I think in short, Sarah is a home care provider, but more than that, we're a very technology-focused service provider. I think talking about the observations and learnings from this China mission, I think is already been very well summarized and presented in the report, which you can find on KTN website. I think I just really want to talk about a couple of things that I want to highlight from my personal view that I learned from this trip. So first of all, I would say the market size, and it's probably the most obvious factors here. So China is a huge market with great potential in elderly healthcare and social care markets. So just throw some numbers here. In 2017, China has over 139 million elderly over 65 years old, and this number will be tripled by 2050 to 400 million. And money spent on elderly through care and medical services will count of 26.47% of China's GDP by 2050. So the potential there is huge for all the potential service providers there. Second point, the government support. I think there's a strong government-led innovation initiative. Prioritizing aging society, treat it as a national strategy. So we've visited both Beijing and Shanghai. We've spoken with officials. I think that they've all mentioned there are numerous policies, pilots, schemes, and fundings put in place in the past 3 years. And there's all around support for the businesses from things like IP protection, tax reduction, free rent of facilities, etc. To trying to collaborate with different businesses and including foreign companies in this social care and healthcare sector. I think worth to mention that there's a 97-3 policy which encourage 90% elderly to receive care at home, 7% in a care home and 3% in nursing home. So just bear that in mind because I think it's quite important number that would give some guidance for different practitioners in the sector. The third point I want to talk about is very close to what we do here, is innovation and tech focused. So China is focusing heavily on using technology to provide scalability and efficiency. Big data, AI, information system development, and also the hardware manufacturing is actually quite world-class in China. We've seen things like smart homes, in-house sensors, beacon technology to detect the people movement and predict the fall risk. Mobile phones, tablets, even the robots are being widely used in the companies that we visited. Obviously I think that the companies we've visited doesn't represent, the entire sector. I mean, there's still a lot of traditional, care or healthcare providers not using the technology, but we can see clearly there's a big effort from Chinese government and businesses trying to promote technologies. I think things like clients' activities are being recorded and monitored, and the system provides real-time visibility to help service providers to make data-driven decisions and provide outcome-based care services. I think it's worth to note that even on the client side, consumer side, Chinese have higher acceptance of modern technologies. So things like QR code, face recognitions, video conferencing. So these kind of things are being widely used in the Chinese community. And being Chinese myself and all my families that live in China, I can see that technology has been widely adopted in the daily life. So I would say for the tech companies, who's looking to roll out your product or, collect data for product development or concept validation, I think that's a very good environment to be. And then the 3 points very quick, suitable business model. I think Paul also mentioned this kind of community-based care facilities. I think just to give you an example, like the density of the population in China make it so unique that you have to find some unique business model there, right? So a typical housing development could be 20 buildings, 18 floors each, 3 flats per floor, which gives you around 1,000 households per development. And that density, going to change the whole strategy for business, how you're going to deliver care for people living in such a densified area. Again, recruitment and training, I think, remains the top challenge for China service provider, quite similarly to the situation in the UK or even globally talking. We have this challenge everywhere. And then lastly, but not, I think, lack of standards, processes, especially around cognitive impairment patients like the dementia care. These are the areas I think China is seeking great knowledge and support from elsewhere. All in all, I think China is a very attractive market with great potential. The risk cannot be ignored, obviously, and I recommend if you need we definitely need a strong local business partner there to provide know-how and maintain the stakeholders relationship. It will require very heavy resources throughout the journey if you want to expand your business to China market, but it is a very, very attractive market. So I'm going to pass over to Sandeep and to our colleague. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tao. So I'm going to hand over next to Christine, Chief Executive of WCS Care.
Thank you, Sandeep. I'm just going to share my screen as well.
Whilst you're doing that, Christine, I think it's a good opportunity just to flag to all participants, if you do have any questions, please do send them through to the Q&A box, and we will answer them either through message or in the Q&A session later on at the end of this webinar. Thanks. Brilliant.
Thanks, then. So just to give you a very brief introduction to WCS Care, we are a not-for-profit care provider in Warwickshire, and we have 13 care homes, so we're relatively small. We do have a reputation for innovation and being braver in using technology than many in the care sector, which I think, in light of the comments I'm going to make, is quite interesting. So first of all, just to say, it was a real privilege to be part of this mission, and I learned so much and also got a huge amount of stimulation from the other participants. Although I've got to say, we didn't all agree. There were quite often occasions where we all had very different views, and I think that was one of the things that enriched it for me. But I was looking at it from a residential care lens. So, what could we learn? What were they doing differently, and what were they doing the same? And the context of that really, was where there were surprises, where there were similarities. Nobody else so far, I think, unless I switched off when I mentioned it, mentioned the two key factors that impact on it. What was talked about a lot was the 4-2-1 matrix linked to the one-child policy in China, which has only recently been lifted, where you had 4 grandparents, 2 parents, and only one child who might now be an adult and who might well have migrated to a big city. And that's one of the reasons, as well as the massive growth in population and the fact that life expectancy is now around 82, that had created this real challenge around healthy aging and care in your later years. I think the other thing that really stuck out for me from day one of the trip was how poorly understood dementia was, and that it wasn't therefore addressed well, and there was still a lot of stigma attached to it. So there were some surprises. The first surprise for me was that private care was very common. I didn't expect that. And linked to that was that those with funds who had their own private income chose to enter residential care earlier than they would do in the UK. So it was quite a positive choice for people. We saw lots of cultural differences, and one that particularly stuck out for me was room sharing. That wasn't something you'd see in the UK and would be completely unacceptable generally in the UK now. And I'm just going to start sharing some of the photos we saw. Another thing that really surprised me was the size of the care facilities. And what we're looking at here is a very upmarket retirement community, but the picture in the background, the second photograph you can see, was actually the dementia care unit that we didn't go into, but was actually really very big and very high. And again, that was something that you wouldn't see in the UK. All right, sorry about that. So there are the 2 photographs I was talking about. The upmarket retirement community in the foreground, and the picture behind it is the dementia care facility, which was very substantial and very big. And then I think the other surprise for me, and it's been alluded to by others, particularly Paul, was the whole issue of policy. And we saw this particularly in Shanghai, the ability to make policy that was both flexible and person-centred and also responsive, and that had happened so fast that not only had they made policy, but they'd implemented it. It was very experimental, I was really impressed by the way the civil servants in Shanghai talked about how they'd taken on board people's experiences, particularly outside the cities, in what worked for them and what didn't. So we visited a number of care facilities in Beijing and Shanghai. There were things we saw that anybody who knows residential care in the UK and probably a lot of the rest of the world would recognise. So, you know, the typical long corridors with areas and facilities off them, activity programmes, which is in the right-hand corner of this slide, which you would recognise if you could read Chinese, which of course I can't, but looks very similar to the sort of thing we'd see in our own homes. And they had activity organisers, or they were called, I think they called them social workers, which confused us at first, but that was in a private facility, that was very much a priority. We saw institutional daily life. We're looking at now at a slide of a state-run facility, but sharing wasn't unusual in a private facility either. And to me, that was quite stark and quite shocking. Tao did point out that culturally it's more usual in China for people to share rooms. So if you go on a business trip, you might well share a hotel room with a number of other people. So, you know, we have to see it within that cultural perspective. But to me, the fact that the only area of personalisation for someone living in a facility like this was their bedside table felt very strange and very shocking. The other things that were interesting for me was that certainly in the state-run facility that we visited, which was for people with dementia, the offer was only for a few months. It was a short-term placement, and it wasn't ever really clear to me what happened to people after that. Likewise, in the private facilities, it was rare that we actually got to visit. I think on one visit we actually did go into an area where people with dementia were being cared for, but in general dementia was not something we were introduced to or saw very much of. And a lot of the questioning that I received was about our dementia practice, and that continued when I came back. I had several follow-ups in terms of emails about that. In terms of technology, I expected to see a lot of high-tech solutions that we aren't using, and to be honest, I didn't see them. I did see things that were quite complex, and I would say not always purposeful. There was a lot of data collection, there was a lot of monitoring of things, but I wasn't always sure that it was constructive and that it was actually helping deliver better care. Or we saw things such as robots used for leisure, which you will see in the UK, and you know, they're great and they're wonderful, but they're actually not central to the delivery of care. So I was quite interested by that, and I felt that, as in the UK, sometimes some of the tech we saw had been led by the ability of the tech enthusiasts to create it, rather than started from somebody's need and what is the need of people's well-being. So an example for me was a handrail that measured how many times an individual walked up and down the corridor and the sort of pressure that they were putting on it. So it would be looking at people's frailty. And the assumption, which is probably right, was that it could predict other problems, for example, increasing frailty or other illness. But I think there's also any number of reasons why someone might not walk up and down a corridor, or why they might be frailer or unsteady on a particular day. And I wasn't sure how the technology gave you that insight. So an example might be, you might choose not to walk up and down that corridor some days because there's somebody you don't like at the end. Or you might only choose to go into a room at a certain time of day because you don't like it when the sun's streaming in, and you do like it when it's cooler. And those factors weren't really part of it. So it was quite stark, I think, on the day we visited the most technologically advanced care facility, that there were a lot of people on the mission who were getting very excited by that, and then there were some of us who were quite doubtful about it. So in terms of what we learned from the mission, I think for me, the key thing was the speed in which it is possible to implement good, appropriate policy on social care. That was really impressive, and I only wish that we could learn from that. It's interesting during this time of COVID that we have had to learn and adapt across the whole community, but particularly in health and social care. And I was saying earlier on today that actually we have struggled and fought to get health services to use technology such as video consultation of doctors. We haven't been able to make that happen, and it happened within days when the COVID epidemic happened. So things are possible, but they often move too slowly in the UK. I liked what I saw of the way care facilities were embedded within the local community. So in Beijing, we saw an open air market that brought a range of goods for people living in the facility to buy and access, and also ensure that they moved outside and used the outdoors. And in Shanghai, we saw the local care facility, which was absolutely smack bang in the middle of a residential area. But they'd involve the local community by providing facilities such as a lunchroom for people who are working out on the street, a laundry, an assistive technology and advice centre. And I think that was a great way of bringing the community in. I think we learnt from the technology that you can lose sight of the why and the what, just like we do in the UK. Why are we implementing technology? Why are we using technology? It's got to be a tool to deliver something, a specific goal, and not a goal in itself. And I think I felt, my conclusion was China have come a long way. They have done a lot more than I had expected to see. And actually we have as much to learn from them as they do from us. And to sort of finish, the best piece of technology I saw that excited me most was this, and it was a 3D printer in the communal areas of one of the care facilities. And I asked why. You know, I couldn't really imagine that people with dementia would be able to use it. And the explanation was that it encouraged younger visitors and children and it injected sort of energy and excitement and engaged people when they came in. So there's a joint project you can do with someone. And that is exactly how I feel technology should be used in care. And so for me, it was a principle and a concept that was the biggest learning point I had. So that is me. I will now try and stop sharing my slides if I can. Pause share.
Thank you very much, Christine. That was great. So I will now hand over to Tim, but just briefly, again, if you've got any questions, please do send them through. We've had some really interesting ones come in so far, so keep sending them through. And I will now hand over to Tim Barclay, CEO of Apello.
Thanks very much. And as I've just been introduced as, I'm Tim. I'm been with Apello for 3 years, just over, as CEO. For those who aren't familiar, we're the UK's largest telecare monitoring provider. We look after about 200,000 elderly and vulnerable people. We typically operate in the space before Christine's world. So Christine is all about living in a care environment. Typically, our customers will be in a retirement setting, i.e. living independently, and that they may have services from TAO's, Sarah Care or similar care organisations. But we're all about independent, we're supporting customers who are about independent living. And that's one of the reasons, I suppose, that it was so useful to have such a cross-section of us on the trip, that we operated in different spectrums of the aging paradigm. The other thing that we do within Apello is we provide leading technology for communal retirement settings. So again, it gave us a useful context to be able to juxtapose what was taking place and what we saw within China. I would say that everything that's been commented on so far by those by other 3 presenters rings very, very true. I do think it was a extremely insightful series of meetings and visits, and they, as you can see from the images here, they ranged from very formal structural presentations with state or local authorities through to more interactive sessions where we actually saw in practice what was happening in the field. One of the things that I think has come across for all of us was that there were an awful lot of similarities between our markets as well as major differences. So that the similarities are some of the obvious ones which have been touched on. So the scale of the aging opportunity, the growth of dementia and the need to have solutions to tackle that. Everyone we spoke to in all of the organizations, whether it was state or private run enterprise, recognized that dementia was one of the challenges and one of the areas where more learning was urgently required. And as both Tao and Paul mentioned, resourcing challenges in the care sector were a very common theme, and of course that's a very common theme here as well. There are some very major differences, and the scale has been mentioned, and that is of course obvious. One of the things that's perhaps not as immediately obvious is the rural versus urban extremes, the degree to which you have these immensely densely packed conurbations versus huge swathes of the country, and an enormous country obviously at that, where millions and millions live, but in very low levels of wealth as well as very low levels of urbanity. So those extremes, I think, made some of the learnings more important to us, but also in some ways perhaps less relevant from a UK perspective. One of the things that I think we would all agree with is, and taking Christine's point about whether it was tech for tech's sake, and I'll offer a personal view on that in a moment or two, from low tech through to high tech, they were getting on with it. Now, as has been mentioned, we only saw a snapshot. It was a very well organized and busy week of activities. So we did see a lot of different organizations over the course of the trip, both in Beijing and Shanghai. But of course, we didn't see anything outside of that. So it wasn't necessarily a total view of the Chinese market, more a view of certain practices within their two major conurbations. What was clear was that their technology was deployed, and none of it, in I think our collective opinion, was technology that wasn't familiar to the UK. Doesn't matter whether you talk about the gait analysis, whether you talk about the handrail that measures grip and strength and frequency of contact. All of those are technologies which are available in the UK. They are just not deployed. And I think this is one of the biggest learnings, certainly for me and perhaps a few others, was that in my opinion, the single biggest difference between the Chinese market and the UK market is the join up between primary care and social care. So there was very clear appetite and ability to be able to deploy an integrated care solution. And I know this is a model that's being explored more for the UK and is one which is being piloted in about 14 or so regions in the UK. But it's very, very clear that where you have a whole system view of ROI, return on investment, you are much better able to make joined up decisions. So I think all of the three panelists before me have referred to something which we all found interesting, which was these combined centres for rehabilitation, for physiotherapy, for dementia care, for day treatment, as well as in many instances for longer term stay, all within the same building. Because of the lack of integration in the primary and social care sector in the UK, it's a lot harder to see how those models would work. Where would the funding come from? How would you pick from selective different budgets? Also, the investment in certain preventative technologies which might stop social care or might be invested in social care, but therefore prevent primary care costs, were much more widely considered because they could be viewed at a macro level and were treated as a macro level, whereas here those are two largely very different budgets, primary care and social care, set independently and take less account of whether or not an investment in one derives a benefit from the other. So I think that was a very clear learning, and one which as a country we could do considerably more to weigh up the pros and cons of. A couple of other things that I'll mention. I'll touch on Christine's, or build on Christine's point about technology and the handrail that's displayed across the bottom, which has the panel underneath that detects touch, frequency, and strength. What I felt strongly was that they used data and technology as one of the lenses rather than the only lens. So I never heard or never inferred that anybody felt that this was the only way they would ever try and determine whether anybody had an increasing level of frailty. It would be one more piece of the jigsaw to be able to try and identify whether those frailties were emerging. And I think this is a lesson for us to consider, and Christine makes the right point about it has to be technology for a purpose. What I think my takeaway was that they definitely saw in many instances that technology provided a very useful set of data points to add to other data points. And some of those might be observational from care workers, as well as specific points which technology could provide. I'll add one other thing, which I think it was a very clear takeaway from me from the trip. It builds on what Tao said and Paul touched on as well. Without question, there is an enormous amount of opportunity within China, just the scale of the population makes that obvious. There is an enormous amount of resource available to UK organisations who are looking to or considering whether they might want to work in China. Innovate UK, the Knowledge Network, the Department of International Trade, Foreign Common Office, all of those have departments, divisions, skills, expertise that you can draw on to some extent. A conclusion for me from the trip was that it was less clear about exactly who you'd go to for what purpose, but without doubt, anybody looking to understand more about the opportunities within China has more than one set of resources, capabilities, relationships and introductions to be able to draw on. The last thing I'd mention is that it was very clear that partnering with a Chinese organization was the most productive and likely way for any UK or outside of the UK for that matter organization to be able to gain real traction. It's a country which is open for business, but of course it is a complex environment to navigate, and having an on-the-ground partner would make that a lot more manageable in my opinion. Those were the main conclusions for me. It was without doubt an extremely insightful trip, and one that I think anybody who was looking to draw some conclusions about the direction of travel that can be achieved when you put real emphasis onto joining up the care, social care and primary care worlds and thinking can achieve. So Sandeep, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. That was really, really insightful. I'll now hand over to Mel Collins, Head of the Fund for International Collaboration at UK Research and Innovation, and back to Hazel Harper, Senior Innovation Lead for Healthy Ageing and Digital Technologies at Innovate UK, to talk about some of the outcomes from this global expert mission on healthy ageing.
Thank you, Sandeep. I'm going to be a little controversial, and I know my topic is outcomes, but I'll kind of go back a little bit before the expert mission, because I think there's some context which probably is important to tell you about. But firstly, I should explain what the Fund for International Collaboration is about. So it's a fund that aims to enhance the UK's excellence in research and innovation through global engagement. So it will forge new bilateral and multilateral research and innovation programs with global partners. And it's a UKRI fund. It's overseen by my team in UKRI International. And it consists of programs which will be maybe calls or competitions. And those are allocated through a competitive bidding process. And that bidding process is open to all UKRI councils. So FIC, or Fund for International Collaboration, spans the whole of UKRI's remit. So there'll be calls and activities across everything that UKRI covers. I won't talk in great depth about the Fund for International Collaboration. I'll go back to kind of what happened before that and where we've got to now. But if people need to know more, then I'm very happy to answer questions on it later in the Q&A session. So I wanted to talk to you about the UK-China relationship. And this goes back to late 2017. So in December of that year, the ministers responsible for science and technology in both the UK and China signed the UK-China Joint Strategy for Science, Technology and Innovation Cooperation. And that strategy represented a step change in UK-China science and innovation collaboration that built on around 40 years of cooperation, but was the first bilateral science and innovation strategy that China had developed jointly with another country. And that strategy described a lot of things that were going to happen. I think the real idea was that you'd have that government-to-government buy-in and steer of science and innovation to address global challenges. It set a framework for future cooperation to jointly tackle those global challenges and to drive economic growth over the next 10 years. And it would cover cooperation across the whole spectrum, from research through to the commercialization of new technologies. And it also outlined some priority areas for collaboration in a variety of areas. Those areas included life sciences, food security, renewable energy, and environmental technologies. And one of the things that was specified in that strategy was that there was a commitment to this new cooperation mechanism. So one of those cooperation mechanisms was called the annual Flagship Challenge program. So those flagship challenges are intended to embody this strategic approach to collaboration. So you have the expectation that the high-level government buy-in to a broad challenge will improve the coordination of research and innovation outcomes, and eventually their translation into policy and practice. So the first of those flagship challenges was announced in 2018 and was on agricultural technologies. So that work was led through BBSRC, which is one of UKRI's councils. And then following that gets us to where we are now. The second flagship challenge was formally agreed in summer 2019, and it was on the topic of healthy aging. And I think, as everybody who's spoken before me has explained, the reason that that's appropriate is that it's a common challenge to both the UK and China. And I think one of the things that's also important to note about it is that it's a challenge which is broad and interdisciplinary and needs to be approached from kind of a holistic way. So I think that's why it's one of the ones where it's really good to have the government-to-government buy-in. And in terms of that announcement in the summer, several activities really helped in the run-up to that. So through late 2018 and early 2019, there were discussions that were held between partners in the UK and China. And those discussions were indicating that healthy aging was likely to be the second flagship challenge topic. And kind of aligning with those discussions, the Fund for International Collaboration had just been launched. So it ran a first wave of bidding through the summer of 2018. And then its second wave opened up in autumn 2018, and that was open to the UKRI councils. And so a UKRI-led bid was put forward and it was approved in early 2019. And that was to run a program of funding activities on healthy aging with China. So yes, so we had the agreement of this funding activity, which would be led by UKRI. That was approved in early 2019. And then obviously this takes us to the timing of the expert mission. So that happened around the same time as the approval was secured for this program of funding on healthy aging. And since then, so when we get to outcomes, this program has been able to develop into 2 calls or competitions. So there was an interdisciplinary research call, which was led by ESRC with NSFC. So that's our UKRI's Economic and Social Research Council in partnership with the National Science Foundation of China. And it's interdisciplinary because although the Economic and Social Research Council leads it, it also involves the Medical Research Council. So that call has opened and closed. It is, I guess, the challenge that it's expecting to address is on healthy aging. It was quite broad in scope. It was open to any research projects that would aid with understanding key health or social challenges facing aging societies. But there was a particular emphasis on consideration of inequalities. So that call opened and closed, and the panel is due to meet, I think, next week. So we will see the funding decision of that announced over the summer, I would expect. And then there's a second activity, which I won't talk about because that's for Hazel to cover. That's an activity which will be led by Innovate UK, and that's less mature than the ESRC-led call. And I think the final thing that I want to talk about is how those 2 funding activities relate to the Flagship Challenge programme. So the work that those 2 funding programmes will support is kind of wrapped up by an expert working group. So that expert working group consists of representatives from business, academia, and relevant government departments. It's chaired by Paul Burstow, and the members in the UK are joined by their counterparts from China. And I think that model of having the Flagship Challenge at the government level, so the Flagship Challenge programme and the commitment to kind of bilateral strategic working aligned with the funder-to-funder relationship, and then the relationships between the research and innovators working on the funded activity, eventually having those kind of 3 strands of buy-in and collaboration wrapped up by an expert working group that turns their findings into I guess, policy recommendations or relevant practice recommendations, I think is a real long-term sustainable model for research and innovation funding. And I guess the kind of final point that I want to make is that the challenge of healthy aging and its kind of appropriateness as a challenge between the UK and China won't go away. So although we have the kind of global expert mission and then that leading to this flagship challenge and these two specific funding activities, I think the fact that those are underpinned by this commitment between the UK and China to address these challenges more strategically will kind of lead to future funding opportunities, which will hopefully be well aligned to the findings of the expert mission and the run-up to the agreement of flagship challenge. So I'll hand over to Hazel in case she wants to speak any more about the specific innovation activity that was funded through the Fund for International Collaboration.
Thank you, Mel. And thank you to our panel and contributions from Paul, Tao, Christine and Tim. It was wonderful to hear again about that trip and how much we learned and the insights that you all have brought to that. Again, I would encourage everybody who hasn't had a look at the report to spend some time looking at it to give you further information. So where are we now? As Mel has said, this is a two-pronged approach for the flagship challenge. The timing was great, really, that we had this opportunity to take the GEM and to link it into the flagship challenge and to have the influence from our GEM onto the flagship challenge to decide what it is we might do. So we are indeed looking to do something within the health and care arena. And I might be sounding vague because at the moment we are still developing the programme. Discussions with China have been underway. Things have been tested and thought about and rethought and reworked. And all this work has been going on in the background patiently because, as you will understand, working country to country is not always straightforward. So there are cultural differences to take account for. And we did learn on the trip where we were using a certain language or reference point that actually meant something quite different in Chinese. So we are progressing. And we've been working with the Ministry of Science and Technology. This is the government department that is takes full responsibility for the flagship challenge and is the lead authority. Now, partway through our discussions, MOST, as it is known, delegated the lead for this particular arm of the programme to the China National Centre for Biotechnology Development, CNCBD, and we are starting our discussions with them as to what shape the programme might take and what type of competitions we might implement. Progress has been steady, but I'm sorry to report that at the moment that progress has been severely affected by COVID-19. Early in January, China was in the midst of fighting COVID-19, and of course that has now moved into the UK and affected how we are interacting internationally and with our general work stream. As you can imagine, Innovate UK has a major part to play in the government strategy in terms of fighting COVID-19. So we are still working, but the work has slowed down somewhat. MOST and CNCBD were the primary and major agency in China fighting COVID-19. So everything effectively has been on pause for a while. So at this point in time, we don't have anything to share about the programme, what it might look like. That's still being developed, and when our call might come out. But we will have a call. We will be working within the health and social care environments, which is fabulous. And we will be looking to offer opportunities that lead to businesses being able to take up these things that we've mentioned, where we've talked about opportunities for research, translating our expertise maybe into a Chinese city, working with Chinese businesses, and having an opportunity to understand that huge market and push on the open door where China is open to business. So I'm sorry that at this time things have been paused due to COVID, but we are beginning to move that along the pipeline, and as soon as we have information, that will be published and shared through our usual networks.
Thank you very much, Hazel.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we all wait very excitedly to hear more about that competition that sounds like will be happening in the near future. I will now hand over to Chris Bourne, Senior Healthcare Specialist, Healthcare UK, the Department for International Trade. We'll talk a bit about support for British businesses.
Thanks, Sandeep. Thanks very much. So I need to preface this as well with the COVID warning, really, because clearly our work has been absolutely focused on the COVID challenge. So our teams in China, in Department for International Trade and the Foreign Office, have been working with potential, suppliers of equipment for the UK, and similarly at this end, we've been dealing with offers of help from a number of companies, both in the UK but also very much overseas. So we've been very consumed by the COVID work and continue to be so, and now looking at it slightly more strategically about how we can develop the supply chain for the UK from a range of countries, including China. So what I must preface what I'm saying is that for the moment we are more limited in what we can do to help. But let me introduce myself. I'm Chris Bourne. I'm Senior Healthcare Specialist with Healthcare UK, which is part of the Department for International Trade, the healthcare sector team, working now part of a cluster with life sciences and indeed bioeconomy. But Healthcare UK is also funded by the Department for Health and Social Care and NHS England, because we help the public sector, i.e. the NHS, as well as the private sector, which is the Department for International Trade's main work. And you've heard perhaps earlier from Tim and others that's what we do. And our main job, before I turn to my slides, our main job is really to be, if you like, a matchmaker, to find opportunities in countries, in this case China, and to link British companies with those opportunities, leading to commercial operations in and with China. So that's our main role. So we in the past, we have taken trade missions of groups of British companies and organizations to China, particularly focused on elderly care and healthy aging. And some companies have got very engaged, other companies have been very interested but not got engaged, and some companies have tried to get engaged and found it difficult. It's not the easy market, as you've heard, but it's got real opportunity. So what we're trying to do is focus down on those companies like Serocare, like Apello and others who have got a particular interest in China. And we're always looking for new companies in healthy aging that are interested in doing this. Because we want to encourage companies obviously to work there, but they've got to be people who really want to focus on China, not just only China, but they've got a real interest and prepared to put, as I think Tao said, quite a lot of effort and collateral into getting involved in China. So that's what we're trying to identify. We're building a group of companies we know are enthusiastic. At the same time, obviously, we've got to make sure we've really got those opportunities in China for companies to follow through with. And our colleagues, in the network in China, in the embassy and consulates in the trade department have been able to identify, probably so far, we've got a list of about 25 companies. That there are more that we'll discover as we do more work there. And they range from property developers who've got a lot of new properties or existing properties where they want to develop some additional services alongside the property for older people, health service providers who are already providing health and care services and want to get innovations from the UK, new ideas. Insurers who are looking at how can they support people so that there's less demand, if you like, on the insurance needs for hospital care by providing more primary and aged care to their subscribers. And those are huge companies, and they've got a huge reach. You know, talk about hundreds of millions in some cases of people. Digital health providers who are looking for, again, niche ideas, niche innovations that could sit alongside their major work in China and indeed globally. And also training providers, particularly those who provide training online. So we've got that list, and it's growing, of companies who've got a genuine interest in the innovation and experience that we can bring to China. Yes, a lot's developing in China. We've heard that already. But if we can find those niche areas where we've got something new and different to offer, there's a real interest. And we find that interest really by going out and talking to customers, by having account management relationships with some of the major companies, and indeed by people like me going out to the market and really doing some more detailed investigation. Sadly, I was due to be in Wuhan in March this year, but as you can imagine, that was cancelled. But the idea being that working alongside our colleagues in country, people with experience and knowledge of the UK supply chain can go and test that market. And of course, as people have referred to, there's a lot of national government initiative around this, and also local municipal authorities, provincial authorities who are really keen to develop and put their own area on the map within national policy. So there've been a lot of announcements. Probably every 2 or 3 months there's a new announcement on elderly care and healthy aging that we should be relating to. So we have relationships with government because they're incredibly important, as I think several of the speakers have said. If you want to work in China, even on a commercial private basis, you still need to have the overall support and blessing of government at whatever level is relevant. So those relationships are very important, and we can help with those because we have the government relationship. So that's preparing the ground, if you like. And I think we've also recognized that large-scale trade missions can work, but actually we think what will be more useful is bringing a smaller group of businesses from the UK to meet those targeted customers I mentioned, possibly alongside major events, because you get a lot of the key people turning up for these events, like China Aid in Shanghai or China International Senior Services Expo, CISE in Beijing. And although you're not looking for the overall footfall, because that isn't necessarily quality interactions, it is a good place to meet up with targeted people because they're likely to be there. And you can meet a lot of people, quite a few people in a short time. But of course, we'll be doing more remote engagement as well, where we've got customers who are really interested in meeting you and meeting British companies and meeting the innovation we can provide. And you can obviously do your online demos there as well. We have a lot in the past, up to now anyway, until the pandemic, of incoming visitors from China and investors from China. Some of those are really just fact-finding, and that's useful, and we need to keep responding to that. And some of them have a more commercial interest, and obviously investors have an interest in potentially investing in companies and in sites in the UK in order to then develop the technology or the care system, which they can then take back to China. I think everyone's mentioned that you can't really work in China on your own. You can set up your WFOE, your wholly foreign-owned enterprise, that is allowed for elderly care, and run your own company there, but you're still going to need partners, and if you can't set up your WFOE, then you're certainly going to need local agents to work on your behalf. And a lot of what we do now is focused on market access issues. You can imagine with the COVID pandemic, we've actually worked a lot in market access because as each country has put in their own restrictions, we've had to work with that and see whether we can get some negotiation about getting supplies from that country. But we also similarly do work a lot with governments on how we can tackle issues of restricted regulations or difficulties around registrations or regulations, and of course IP, and we have a full-time IP officer in Beijing, for example, who works on this. So we're really interested to hear about any difficulties British companies are having, because we can then try and tackle those, and that can be worth a lot to the UK economy if we can move some of the access problems away and allow more companies to trade in China. And it's not a Chinese issue, it happens in many other markets too. We've heard, I think, quite a lot about some of the initiatives from the UK, where there's UK money going into research and innovation and new system development, such as the Prosperity Fund. We've heard about the Flagship Challenge and the Newton Fund. And I think we see those as ways to put UK organizations and companies alongside partners in China, who can then develop things under these funded projects, but who then may well find they can develop commercial relationships following that, or where we've promoted the idea of British innovation and can pave the way for British companies to do well there. I think, as Tim mentioned, there is a lot of support around. I mean, we're in Healthcare UK, normally based in London, but now dispersed around the UK. Obviously, it's there to help, along with the DIT colleagues in the country. And we use also a relationship with the China-Britain Business Council, where a company wants a lot of detailed support and information or market intelligence, then CBBC will be our partner in providing that. So there's a lot we can do to help. There is a website that you can register if you want to find export opportunities in all sorts of sectors. This isn't just healthcare. And similarly, customers can come and find you there. It's a fairly general platform, but I think it's always worth getting your name up there and seeing whether opportunities come your way through that website. But just to be aware that it's the reference at the bottom, it's the great.gov.uk, great being the British government's advertising campaign really for the UK. Great we are. So that's all I wanted to say at this point. Very happy to answer questions or engage with people individually afterwards, and that's my contact details. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was really interesting. I am now going to hand over to Gabriella and David, who are going to facilitate the next session, which is the Q&A. And thank you all for sending in your questions. So over to you both.
Hello, everyone. David Calder here to get things started. We've got, I think if I look, we've got around 30 questions altogether. We'll see how many we can get through. You can still send some in and we might get to you, I can't promise. And we might reprioritize as we go through. But the format will be then that I'll announce who I'm going to direct it to if I know, or I'll explain that it's probably one that I need the panel to pick up, and we'll look for a volunteer. And then I'll read out, hopefully slowly and clearly, the question, and we'll see how that goes. Is that okay with everyone? So the first question we've got here, I'm going to direct towards Chris. That's right, Chris. And it goes like this. So how can businesses offering older age and fintech solutions penetrate the Chinese market with a different culture and language? So it's to do with the issues that are specific on the ground there. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, well, I think, as I said, the importance, it's very important to have a partner or an agent or a distributor, and they will give you a lot of advice. And we can, as DIT, help you find suitable partners in that way. But there is, I think, for China, language is the obvious one. Actually, most systems do need to be translated into Mandarin if they involve language at all. And particularly, I think when you're working in the care sector, then most of the staff will definitely not speak English. If you're working in a high-end healthcare, you might find more English speaking in medicine. But actually, for most staff, and indeed, of course, service users, then you need Mandarin. But apart from that, as people have said on this seminar, there are a lot of different cultural issues. This issue of being prepared to live in a tower block. Those tower blocks you saw, Cherishiyern, I've been there. They are, people are used to living in tower blocks, and they're used to having social life at the base, at the bottom floor of the tower block, where a lot of activity goes on, calligraphy and all sorts of interesting stuff. And one of those tower blocks is actually a clinic as well, with beds in. So it's a very interesting sort of whole community. So there are differences, and you have to learn what they are. And but I think what is definitely there. Is that what's common is the almost philanthropic desire to do something good for your citizens, knowing how important and respectful people are of their parents and grandparents. That filial duty is very, very strong cultural mode, and that's why people are very keen to make sure their parents and grandparents, if they cannot look after them now in their middle class world where they're moving around the country and maybe the world, are properly looked after. So yes, a lot of cultural issues, yes, language, and certainly learning to do business, which may mean long dinners and the occasional glass of rice wine.
Thanks, Chris. Moving on then to keep things moving, Tao, this one directed to you. In fact, there were several that Sarah Care have dragged out. You may have seen some of them yourself in the questions and answers, so I think you might be busy with follow-up. But this one seemed like a representative one. So does Sarah Care provide any digital management of medicines in domiciliary care settings or care homes, and indeed remote monitoring using tech and so on for rehab and exercise? So you can let us know what your platform's capable of now, Tao.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks for the question. I think in the domiciliary care settings, medication management is one of the most challenging tasks and probably the most inefficient process as well. So we've identified that's definitely an area we want to break through and make significant transformations. So it's currently in the product development pipeline. And I think around the monitoring behaviors or kind of performance of elderly in their home or care home. Currently, we do not have any sensors offered to our clients. However, we are running a pilot with IBM currently with an infrared sensor. We place them in a couple of clients' home as well as volunteers, and we're collecting information and data to see whether these sensors would be really helpful to identify the fall risk, for these elderly clients. Because I mean, the fall is definitely a killer, for most of the elderly clients. We want to stop people going to the hospital due to the fall, and these sensors, hopefully, we can use them to identify the early signs of these frail and identify the movements into kind of a high-risk area, for example, into bathroom or dementia patients kind of wandering around in the house, in an unregular area. So hopefully we can identify those from these sensors. So yeah, but thanks. That's a very good question, and that's the area that we're currently working on.
Thanks. I think Gabriella, you're going to ask the next couple of
questions. Hi, this is a question that goes for all the panel. So please choose who would like to answer, and is China population's significant acceptance of IT and AI solutions enables the introduction of solutions at scale. Can that be replicated in the UK or overcome in the UK and in other markets with populations less trusting or more skeptical of such solutions?
Well, I'll offer an initial view on this, and I think the simple answer is that if you dress things up as technology, then there will be a natural skepticism towards them. But if you focus very strongly on the benefit rather than how the benefit is achieved, then you get universal buy-in. The example I give very often to try and illustrate this is if you describe to somebody who is elderly a piece of maybe 1 meter wide technology which is heavy and power consumptive, then of course they will be nervous. Why on earth would I want that? If you say, would you like a television, then everybody accepts it. It's about describing the benefit and making the benefit familiar rather than describing the technology. So I think that's the power that, whether it's AI, whether it's virtual reality, augmented reality, all of these over the years ahead will play a part in delivering much better care outcomes, but it will be how they're positioned and, importantly, how they are supported with caring, empathetic people. They are not going to be a replacement for, they are going to be an addition to the insights and the knowledge that caring and empathetic people have to enable them to be more effective and more productive.
Gabriella, if I could come in as well, just to sort of add, I think my experience has been that 10 or 15 years ago, technology was something weird and wonderful and most people didn't know how to use it. And that since we've all had smartphones and iPads and been on Facebook and all those sorts of things, the technologies that focus on that are easy for people to use. What's good about a residential care setting is that whereas the actual resident can't often use that, there are staff who can use it for them. And I think it's also about motivation. So, you know, we've had a lot of people who've been able to use, forgotten the name of it, but the Amazon command thing, because it's motivating, because actually if you shout at it, you will get it to play music you want to play, or you'll get it to phone someone you want to phone. So where there's motivation and where it's simple, people will use it and will adopt technology. And that's why I sometimes get challenged by people who are very focused on technology, who keep coming up with solutions to problems that don't exist.
Thank you, Tim and Chris, actually very good. And I think, Tao, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, just a very quick one from our own experience as well. I think definitely if you compare China and UK, which I mentioned earlier, China probably slightly easier to adopt to these technology. Like talking from my parents' experience, you know, they all have mobile phones. You know, they use mobile phones doing video conferencings with children's and just using, you know, in the daily life, you know, to pay something they buy online or even offline. You know, everyone got the QR code, you know, with the local shop. You know, they can just scan the code and then get everything paid. So I would say it's probably more easier for Chinese side to accept the technology, but I wouldn't say it's impossible to roll out the technology in the UK. And from our own experience for Sarah, we roll out the Sarah applications, a mobile application for both our carers and the clients and their family members. It's more challenging to engage with family member and clients to say, oh, could you use our app, which is going to help you a lot to monitor your care. You know, you can see who's coming to see you, you can see what time you're going to receive care, you can read the whole visit reports the carer written as soon as they finish the visit, and then click on that submit button. I mean, it is challenging, but back to kind of Tim's point earlier, and also Christine mentions, is how you approach people to present the technology. Is not replacing anything, it's actually to make things better, right? So it's assist carer to deliver a better care much easier, and it assists family members to monitor the care services and having a, you know, peace of mind of your family. And it's also giving great visibility for you as a service user to receive the care. So it's just all about how we you know, promote the technology rather than you know, thinking it's impossible. Yeah, I think it's definitely possible to make it happen.
Just to add a couple of other thoughts to this, I think the points that have been made by colleagues are absolutely right. I think one of the most important things is to not view this purely through the lens of the piece of kit, the technology. It's actually to look at it from the perspective of the service that actually is put around it. I think one of the consistent failures of public policy in the UK in regards to the deployment of technology-enabled care has been that it's been seen about selling more kit rather than actually selling the ability to enable someone to maintain their independence, to enhance their quality of life, and to enjoy a range of support services that enable them to do that. So I think there's two pieces to this. One is that it's about how technology is deployed upstream to support people maintain their independence, to maintain their outward perspective and being connected into their communities. And then it's about how it supports care workers to be more effective and more able to deliver the range of services that they're providing. So I think actually if we get the right approach to adopting technology, then I think it's less of an issue. I think it's just that we've had the wrong approach to adopting technology. It's been more about selling the kit than actually selling a wholesale transformation of the way in which we deliver our service.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, everyone. And I think that the next question is going on the same format. So, David, I guess that you.
Yeah. Thanks, Gabriella. Yeah, so really it's just an extension of the discussion now because you've sort of answered some of this. I think it's still worth exploring though. So do you think that the rate of the aging of the population in China has affected how technology is adopted? And really the follow-up to that is which technologies and services, to come to Paul, have been most successful so far? So I suppose it's a comparison with the UK market in a way. I think to the panel again, I think that you've probably all got something to say about that.
So I'm very happy to offer some initial thoughts. I'm conscious that we may end up covering some repetition here, and given that there's so many more questions and only 10 minutes left, I'll keep it very brief from my perspective, which is that it wasn't the technology, I don't think, that was the driver. It was the fact that the government and the state intervened with so much urgency, and that the public sector the private sector responded with so much urgency because of the scale of the opportunity that's had the biggest bearing on technology rather than the technology itself. Thanks,
Tim. Any other quick points then? Because I think we are at risk of repeating ourselves a bit. Okay, we'll move along. So I've got another one here. I would say actually we've covered quite a few of these questions that we've been highlighting. There's an interesting one. I'm going down the list now, Gabriella. So just so you know where we're up to, because we're sharing this screen. So this one we've kind of covered as well. So I'm going to move down further. Sorry, everyone. Yeah, so this is a nice one, I think. We'll start with this one. We'll go to this one next. If the population is getting old before it's getting rich, how are innovating businesses designing their business models to accommodate that? So I think that is an interesting one about how you adopt to a lean environment, I would say. I thought we'd start with maybe Paul on that one, but I think again the panel can come in.
So I think in the time that we were there, we probably saw two of the more mature markets, the Beijing market and the Shanghai market. And I think one of the models that was very clearly developing in Shanghai was in fact a property finance model. So some of the very big out of city developments that were taking place to provide housing with care, effectively sort of communities in which people would live together and be supported if they had care needs later in life, were being funded through the sale of the accommodation that those people have been living in the center of Shanghai. So some of the very significant increases in real estate values in Shanghai was driving that. So it was being driven in a way through their economic growth and the value of land in their city centers. Now that's not a sustainable model for the whole of China, let alone a sustainable model for the UK, where there are such significant differences in property values. So I think there is still room for more innovation in terms of the models. And indeed, that's why the Chinese government is running these 15 pilots at the size of almost a third of the UK population to trial different formulas for social insurance. With different levels of contribution, different points at which they might start requiring people to contribute to it. And I think that in a sense is the sort of experimentation they're doing to inform their design of ultimately a public policy solution, which is some form of long-term care sort of insurance. Now, I think that speaks to Christine's point earlier on, which is whilst we may not have the appetite to experiment in that way here in the UK, we certainly have the opportunity to learn internationally from those places that have identified the fact that aging populations and maintaining a healthy aging population is one of the big public policy challenges, and it does need that sort of decisive leadership to make the change.
Thanks, Paul. Does anybody else want to chip in from the panel on that one?
I think that's a great
Yeah.
summary.
Okay.
I was just going to add really that I think whilst very specific offers would maybe of interest to people already providing care or got a particular need, I think particularly those big developments that Paul was referring to, they may not have much understanding of what it takes to support older people living in their apartments, nice apartments, as they get more needy, as they need more support. And I think are looking for some more of a, as we heard earlier, sort of integrated approach that would really relieve those property developers, those property owners, large-scale owners, of the worry about how you're actually going to provide the support and care to older people. And I think that, interestingly, also probably too of local governments who are trying to look at how to run a system across a geographic area, a population. And so I think, as well as niche offers, there is real interest and value in things that bring together all the different components: the the assessment, the alarms, the alerts, the diagnostics, the monitoring of treatment, the rehabilitation, as well as the sort of wellness and prevention end. So I think it's worth thinking about how a particular product or service would actually link into a wider system, a more integrated system, both for those big private players, but also for government partners.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Shall I move to the next one?
Yes, Gabriella, I've got one more if you've got time as well around policy and recommendations. But
Well, the next one is really formal, and it's a very specific question in terms of funding. Are there any calls for collaborative work or research around health and dementia that have come up as a result of this mission?
Well, so there was, as a result of this mission, we had the ESRC-led call, and I believe that dementia would have been within the scope of that call, but that's now closed. We don't yet know what the Innovate UK-led activity will look like, so it's possible that that may lead to things where dementia is within scope. And then in terms of activities between the UK and China, we don't have any more expected in the near future, but as I said earlier, I think the understanding is that the UK government and the Chinese government are committed to collaborating strategically on a long-term basis and to address a number of key challenges, and aging population is one of those. So there may well be future activities, but obviously given where we are in the spending review cycle, I can't comment any further about things in the longer term future. But yeah, I would hope, I feel that that's a challenge that won't go away. And yes, please do. I shared a link in the Q&A to our website, which is where we share the list of opportunities as they come up. So when the Innovate UK one is ready, that will appear on there. So please do watch our website for anything else that comes up.
Mel, it might be worth adding the Prosperity Fund. The China Prosperity Fund has focused on healthcare and in the past has included a project on dementia, helping the Chinese government develop its thinking and policy around dementia. So we don't know what the next round of the China Prosperity Fund will look like, but it may well include healthy aging components. It might even include dementia.
Yep.
thanks. Sandeep, how long have we got remaining on the Q&A?
I think we can take one more question, and then I'll close at 3:45.
Okay, so this one really follows on, I think, from what we were just talking about there, and it's kind of next steppy in its context. So if Hazel had been here, I think she would have had something to say about this. So it's probably Chris and Mel. Are the findings from the GEM, from the work we've done so far, being fed into any specific UK policy and regulations, or are they just summarised as recommendations and suggestions? So what's next from a global expert mission? Can I ask you or not?
You can definitely ask me. As far as I'm aware, that hasn't happened, but it possibly is something that would have happened and that I would not have known about.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's possible that others have heard of things. Yeah, as far as I've seen, there's been nothing, but I think that's probably because it's outside of my remit.
Okay, so I know a little bit about that, and I think Sandeep might be able to answer as well, and it depends is the answer. So it forms recommendations initially, and Sandeep, you might want to step in, but there is a series of steps for initiatives that look promising, which we follow as a Innovate UK family. I don't know if you want to say something about that, Sandeep. It's probably quite a nice thing to finish on, actually, what happens next with GBIP and the like.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think that's a great question to end on. Yeah. So yeah, after a global expert mission, we normally have a set of recommendations, and it might lead to if it's a great opportunity and if there's appetite on both sides, it might lead to joint funding competitions, as we're seeing through the Flagship Challenge, or follow-up visits. So David, you just mentioned a GBIP, which is a Global Business Innovation Partnership, which is led by the EEN, the European Enterprise Network, and they send over a delegation of businesses to kind of broker new partnerships over in that country. We didn't see this follow in China, but we had the funding competition, so we didn't think it was necessary at the time, although things might change as we move forward. And also there might be exchanges, whether that's in the research space or in the innovation space, sort of the knowledge transfer partnership schemes that are developing, and also policy dialogue developing as well. So this was quite a broad global expert mission in that it covered policy, it covered research, and it covered innovation. So, and I think we've touched upon these areas through some of the funding competition that Mel mentioned with the ESRC, MRC, and MOST, the Ministry of Science and Technology in China. So yes, a great question to end on, and I would like to thank everyone for joining this webinar, and I hope you all found it useful. For those of you that had asked questions and we weren't able to answer them, do not worry, we'll be sending out the contact details of all of the panelists so you can follow up with any queries following this webinar. This webinar will also be recorded, and the slides will also be shared in that email as well. So I would like to thank you all for joining, and I hope you all have a lovely day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks very much, Sandeep. Thank you. Bye-bye.